Welcome. This is the Senior Safety Advice Podcast, and we are so glad that you've made it to a calmer corner of your day. Here, we focus on real solutions, practical help, and the kind of encouragement we could all use a little more of. So let's get to it.
Okay, let's unpack this. If you ask anyone, what defines being human, the answer always seems to circle back to connection.
Right, this profound inherent need for it.
We're social beings, fundamentally. We need to build these complex relationships just to feel seen, to feel valued. And for a long time, we really just saw that as an emotional thing.
A key to happiness, maybe? But that view is, well, it's far too narrow. And it leads us right into this major tension in society. Despite this deep biological drive we all have, loneliness has just exploded globally.
Yeah.
It's now a recognized, serious public health crisis.
And that's the mission for today's deep dive. We're moving beyond the feeling of loneliness and looking at the hard research, the stuff that links it to actual cognitive decline.
To dementia.
Exactly. We need to see how strong that link is and, more importantly, understand the biological pathways. How does a social absence translate into a neurological risk?
So we're synthesizing the most critical findings. What do these studies actually tell us about how our social lives affect our long-term brain health? You're about to see how your social network might just be a form of preventative medicine.
Okay, let's start with the data then, because some of these findings are, well, they're pretty shocking. What was the most compelling evidence we found?
For me, it comes from this large-scale analysis. It was published in the journal Neurology back in February of 2022.
And what makes that one so powerful?
It's the definition they used. It wasn't vague. They focused on a very specific measure. Feeling lonely for 3 or more days in the past week.
So a measure of chronic, persistent loneliness, not just a bad day.
Exactly. Pervasive subjective distress.
And when they applied that definition, what did they find?
The significant and a very durable association. That kind of loneliness was linked to a substantially increased 10-year incidence of all-cause dementia.
10 years. So it's not just a mood marker. It's a real predictive risk factor for what's coming a decade down the road.
Powerful one.
But here's the detail that really got me. The part that makes this a landmark study. When they segmented the population, the risk wasn't spread evenly, was it?
Not at all. They found one small, precise group where the risk was just astronomical.
It was tripled. The risk of developing dementia was tripled for lonely adults who are under 80 years old and you really need to pay attention here, who did not have the APOE4 allele.
And that's the key. That changes everything.
Explain why. For anyone who doesn't know, what is the APOE4 allele?
It's the most widely recognized genetic risk factor for late-onset Alzheimer's. If you have a copy of that gene, your risk profile goes up dramatically.
Wait, why would the risk triple for people who, genetically speaking, should have a lower baseline risk?
That is the profound implication here.
It suggests the mechanism is totally different.
It strongly suggests that loneliness operates as a powerful, independent pathway to neurodegeneration. Think of the APOE4 gene as one highway to dementia risk. This research found a second, equally dangerous route.
A route fueled by social disconnect.
Exactly. And it seems capable of overriding any protective effect you might have from not having that gene. It really solidifies loneliness as a hard biological risk factor.
Not just a psychological variable.
Not at all.
And that's the key shift, right? It moves this whole conversation from social welfare into, well, clinical preventative medicine. And the study even zeroed in on the cognitive areas that were most affected in that high-risk group.
Absolutely. For that specific segment, the APOE4 negative group, loneliness was most strongly associated with poorer executive function.
Executive function. Let's break that down. Why is that so central to brain health? How would you see that decline in daily life?
Executive functions are the high-level processes. They're what we use to manage ourselves, to achieve goals. We're talking about things like working memory, planning, self-control, judgment, mental flexibility. It's the difference between, say, managing your finances efficiently and suddenly feeling totally overwhelmed by just simple daily planning.
And if chronic loneliness is chipping away at that core capability, the consequences are devastating. It becomes a vicious cycle.
Precisely. And this isn't some outlier finding. We need to put this in context.
Right. There was other research.
Back in 2007, a study found Alzheimer's risk more than doubled in lonely people. Then in 2019, another one showed a 40% increased risk of dementia. The message from the data is persistent, and it's clear.
Okay, so the statistical evidence is robust. It's undeniable. But this brings us to what the researchers themselves are asking. the causality question.
$1 million question.
Is loneliness the cause or is it a consequence?
And that's the crucial scientific frontier right now. It's the classic chicken or egg dilemma. On the one hand, loneliness could be an early symptom.
So the disease makes you lonely first.
Exactly. Your brain is already undergoing subtle changes in areas that manage social cues or emotion, so you start to withdraw socially. You feel lonely before anyone notices cognitive problems.
Okay, that's one possibility. What's the other?
The other is that loneliness is an early contributor, a true risk factor that actively drives the disease process through, say, prolonged biological stress.
And that distinction is vital because if it's a symptom, we focus on the disease. If it's a contributor,
then we can focus on prevention, on intervention.
And while the scientific community sorts that out, we already know what causes loneliness, and it's often beyond our control. Living alone, losing a partner.
Chronic illness, hearing loss that makes conversation exhausting, or even huge societal events like the isolation we all saw during the pandemic.
So whether loneliness is the spark or the smoke, we have to understand the mechanisms, the how. How does it compromise the brain?
Right, because that's what we can act on right now.
Let's turn to that cascade effect then. How does a lack of connection start to translate into, actual physical damage in the brain?
What's fascinating here is that loneliness doesn't just hit the brain in one way. It creates this domino effect.
Okay.
The first and maybe most straightforward mechanism is just a lack of brain stimulation.
The brain needs a workout.
It does. It's a use it or lose it organ. When you're socially isolated, you lose those opportunities for complex interaction. Things like decoding facial expressions, following a story, dynamic conversation. That's heavy lifting for the brain.
And without that,
reduced stimulation can lead to atrophy, weakened neural pathways. You basically lower your overall cognitive reserve.
That makes perfect sense. But the second mechanism is more chemical, right? It's about stress.
Correct. Chronic loneliness is a persistent threat signal. Your body interprets that isolation as a survival risk, and it triggers the HPA axis, our stress response system.
And that means more cortisol.
Constantly high levels of the stress hormone, cortisol. And high cortisol over the long term is profoundly toxic to the brain.
Especially to which parts?
Particularly the hippocampus. That's the brain's center for learning and memory formation. Chronic stress disrupts the creation of new brain cells and can actually shrink the hippocampus.
So you're bathing your brain's memory center in a toxic hormonal soup.
It's a good way to put it. So a lack of stimulation hits executive function, and the stress hits memory.
And that stress leads to another problem.
Yes, the third mechanism. Inflammation. High cortisol and persistent stress lead to generalized systemic inflammation. Your immune system is just constantly on a low-grade state of alert.
We've talked about inflammation before. We know it's bad for your heart, but how does it get to the brain?
It can cross the blood-brain barrier. And once it's there, it can damage delicate brain tissue, maybe even accelerate the buildup of proteins like amyloid plaques, which are hallmarks of Alzheimer's.
So it creates a hostile pro-dementia environment inside your skull.
Essentially, yes.
And we can't ignore the physical health connection here. The cascade isn't just neurological.
That is an absolutely crucial point. Poor social relationships are strongly associated with an increased risk of vascular conditions.
Heart disease, stroke.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the link there often comes back to that chronic stress, but also things like poor diet, lack of exercise, things that are common with long-term isolation.
And you listening to this should care about a heart issue when we're talking about brain health because...
Why? Because your brain health depends entirely on your vascular health. Your circulatory system is the supply line. It brings the oxygen and glucose your brain needs to function.
So if the supply lines are damaged...
you're in trouble. Heart disease and stroke are established risk factors for all types of dementia. So if loneliness is damaging the circulatory system, it is inherently increasing your cognitive risk. It's a physical, social, and emotional trifecta.
Understanding this whole cascade, the stress, the inflammation, the vascular damage, this is what lets us pivot. We can move from just defining the problem to figuring out what to do.
And this is where the news is genuinely good. If you connect this to the bigger picture, the most crucial takeaway is that loneliness is categorized as a modifiable risk factor for dementia.
Modifiable, that's the key word.
It is. This is fundamentally different from fixed risks, like your age or your genetics.
You can't change your DNA, but you can change your social habits. What does that mean for how we should prioritize brain health?
It means we need a shift in perspective. We have to start seeing signs of loneliness in ourselves and in our loved ones, not just as an emotional state, but as a critical biological health vulnerability.
It needs to be taken as seriously as high cholesterol.
Or high blood pressure. Exactly.
So what does that look like practically?
The analogy holds. Just as we get regular checks for vascular health or screen for cancer, we should be vigilant about markers of brain health, especially for people with known risk factors. And loneliness is now firmly on that list.
And the intervention isn't a pill.
The intervention might be a referral to a community program, a support group. The treatment is rebuilding those connections. It's about reactivating those executive functions.
It reframes it. It's not a personal failing. It's about actively maintaining your cognitive capacity.
And that's essential, because the research reinforces that identifying these risks and detecting changes early, that is the key to delaying or even preventing cognitive decline.
If you can address the loneliness, you might just remove one of the most powerful accelerants for dementia risk.
The intervention window is open.
So what does this all mean? We started with this basic human need for connection, and we followed the data to this shocking finding that loneliness can triple dementia risk, even for people who seem genetically protected.
And then we explored the mechanisms. The lack of brain stimulation, the cortisol damage, the inflammation, the vascular problems.
The conclusion seems inescapable.
It is. Your investment in your social relationships is a direct investment in your physical cognitive longevity. It is preventative medicine for your brain.
And that brings us to the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. It circles right back to that surprising finding about the APOE4 gene.
Think about it this way. The research specifically showed that this dramatic risk increase applied even to people without the high-risk gene.
Which implies what?
It implies a powerful principle. It suggests that the effort you put into maintaining your social bonds, into proactive connection, curiosity, community, that may act as a neuroprotective shield.
A shield strong enough to influence even your genetic predisposition.
It might be. Maintaining active social connections isn't a luxury for your mental well-being. It appears to be an essential biological safeguard for everyone, regardless of your personal or family health history.
This podcast is part of our mission to help older adults live safely and independently. If you'd like to take the next step, visit aginginplacedirectory.com, where you'll find specialists, helpful resources, and inspiration to make every home your place to thrive.